Hey, welcome to Tape, brought to you by the Ram 1500 Sport, built exclusively for Canadians. Rory, massive news. No trade, but about as big as it can get outside of that. Mike Babcock let go by the Toronto Maple Leafs. In comes Sheldon Keefe. We're going to bring Luke Fox on to speak extensively, not just about the Babcock time, but casting ahead to what he expects under Keefe, a person he has covered with the Marlies. But your reaction, pal, to this really, really, really big story.
The biggest story in the NHL so far this season.
No doubt.
No doubt. It's just shocking how quickly this all fell apart, right? I mean, it had been talked about so many times that they wanted to give him the year. They wanted to at least give him a stretch of games where everybody was healthy.
Yeah.
And it looked like that was going to happen, and then Marner goes down. Kerfoot goes down. It wasn't going to line up, and Marner's down for a while. So you lose 6 games in a row. You fall to 9-10-4, 9-10-3, whatever they're at right now, and it just gets to a point where you can't let it go on much longer, or else the season could slip away. They're out of the playoffs. They're closer to the bottom of the league right now than they are to a playoff spot, which is mind-blowing.
Just baffling. I never, I was asked on air before the season, could I see any scenario where Babcock didn't make it through the regular season? And I said unequivocally no. Because the only way I thought it could get that bad for the Leafs was if Anderson was hurt for 2 months, and there would have been that excuse. I never saw the team, even though they were pretty average the back half of last year, I never thought you could get to a point where it just felt like, oh man, something's got to change.
Yeah. And obviously, there are a lot of issues here. There's the roster construction thing. There is the injury part of it. But I think some of it, too, is that he didn't really adapt enough. Even in that Vegas game where Toronto was pushing, the third period was the only period they played really well in. And it looked like they might actually escape there with 1 or 2 points.
Yep.
And would have if not for Marc-Andre Fleury's
If this was move
save.
of the year, that was save of the year.
Yeah, but he did something that I think a lot of people question, and he's done many times before, is they score a goal, they look like they're pushing, he puts the fourth line out on the ice. And the fourth line on that team doesn't have when you have the weapons you do, especially in your top 6, Tavares, Matthews, even Spezza was playing awesome. Like, you have other options, and you go to your fourth line, and it's like what's going on here?
Yeah.
And the refusal to, although, again, he did it in that Vegas game for a very short period of time, to go away from the lefty-righty split on the blue line, and that limits the combinations that you can go with. Maybe more of those possibilities open up under Sheldon Keefe, but it's just, we spoke about it a bit on the podcast last week, where when your window is open, you go aggressively because you don't know how long it's going to stay that way. And not that Toronto's window is closed or anything like that, far from it, but it did close on Mike Babcock's tenure there, right? So it's just, it wasn't that long ago. He comes here with an 8-year, $50 million contract. We're tracking plane flights to see what the heck is going on. Is he choosing Buffalo or Toronto?
It was as big a deal, if not bigger, than the Leafs drafting Austin Matthews, because he was choosing to come here.
Yeah, exactly. And he's the third most winningest coach in NHL history. It's not that he forgot. It's not that suddenly Mike Babcock is a bad NHL head coach. I assume he's going to land somewhere, and we'll talk about that.
We're going to talk about that.
But wherever he goes, I would expect him to get good results there again for at least a time. But the reality is, for any coach, you've seen this with other fantastic coaches, Ken Hitchcock chiefly, that they eventually just wear out their welcomes. And whether or not it's in Babcock's case, maybe he didn't jive with the roster construction. Maybe some of the players just grew tired of that. It happens to everybody, and it happened quicker here in Toronto than I think anybody imagined.
So the Leafs aren't the only preseason contender struggling. You look around the league. Tampa Bay, Dallas has had the weird season because they were in a huge hole. Now they're coming back. They're essentially 500. Tampa Bay, the Nashville Predators, the Vegas Golden Knights. Like, you could make a case the only teams that were seriously pegged as contenders that are living up to it are Washington and Boston, because I don't think anyone had St. Louis really circled as, even if only because of the cup hangover, everyone still thought they were a good team, but you didn't know about Binnington. You didn't know how they're going to come back after the short summer.
Happened in Winnipeg that opened up the door for that.
Sure.
Somebody's got to take over the Central,
sure.
right? But
yeah, you know, I don't remember seeing them on a lot of preseason. Hey, this team's going to win the cup. Certainly not the Islanders, I don't think. So this is all to say the Leafs aren't the only team going through some struggles, and Calgary firmly in that group as well. Now, no one thinks Bill Peters, doesn't seem to be any consensus that he's in real trouble, but something's got to give there pretty soon.
Yeah, so we're recording this on Thursday. Calgary plays tonight. If they lose this game, it'll be 6 in a row. They're struggling and out of the playoffs. That's like an identical situation to what Toronto was in when they made the decision to fire Babcock. But Calgary's not in the exact same situation as a team. This is Bill Peters' second year as the head coach in Calgary. He just won the division title last year. Like, he is not getting fired out of that situation. It turns to trade, really. And as we know, Brad Treliving is no stranger. He's not afraid to swing for a big trade. I can't imagine that it goes so far that we're talking about a November Johnny Gaudreau trade, really.
Can I jump in?
Talk about that in fake trades.
Can I jump in right now, too, upon further reflection on the fake trade of him going to Jersey for Taylor Hall? There's no way Calgary could do that without an extension. If I was Jersey, I would do that in the blink of an eye if that was on the table. And
for sure.
I agree with you. It's not on the table. Yeah.
That's a summer trade. If they miss the playoffs or whatever, they lose in the first round again. That's probably on the table. But in season trade, like you're looking at that defense. You know, Elliot Friedman in 31 Thoughts mentioned Oliver Shillington as a potential guy that could be on the move. Travis Hamonic as another guy who's got to be talked about. TJ Brody, they've certainly tried to trade him in the past, and right now he's not playing after his episode last week, but that's another guy that's probably going to be on the table. It's not an easy fix because what they need is some scoring. You know, the first line isn't bringing it to the degree that we thought. They actually moved Sean Monahan off of that line and down next to Matthew Tkachuk. Matthew Tkachuk is the one who's carrying the load there. But they need something added to that top six to give a little bit more sustainable scoring punch there. You know, one of their assistant coaches, Jeff Ward, was in the media on, I believe it was the fan station out there and the Sportsnet radio station out there in Calgary, saying we need players who don't like to win or don't like to lose, like to win, don't like to lose. And
important distinction.
A little bit of challenging his players, and Bill Peters really doesn't seem like one, and hasn't been in the past, to really blow up in the media. But you're getting to a point here where
he's simmering.
You got to start pushing some buttons, right?
Yeah.
He's definitely simmering. He's definitely been frustrated with the inconsistency with his team. They have been off and they have been on. But the thing that we all were worried about or concerned about if it was going to hold up with this team was the goaltending. And David Riddick has been so fantastic that he's played more games than they thought he would, and they've had to lean on him more than expected. And the defense on the blue line has been fine. It's just been, you don't know what Calgary Flames team you're going to get. So if they get to this point where they lose 6 in a row, don't expect Bill Peters to be the one who's fired. I would expect a trade before long, though, and it's just where's that going to come from? Because again, like, they've got contracts to deal with this summer. They are close to the cap, so it's not just an easy. You gotta worry about the money, but it would seem like there is a move coming to Calgary, just not a firing of the coach.
So there I was doing the dishes on, let's see, I suppose it was Wednesday night. My frequent evening routine of trying to accomplish things while watching hockey, had the iPad up, watching a little Habs Senators, and lo and behold, it got a little misty. Guy Charbonneau brought out my first jersey was Guy Charbonneau, a press-on Guy Charbonneau jersey that the number started fading, I think, like 3 weeks in, either because of the quality of the jersey or because of how much I wore it. So that is my background. That is the history of my relationship with Guy Charbonneau. But it did get me thinking about, when every year or frequently when we have Hall of Fame inductions, you get screams about the bar not being high enough and Guy Charbonneau coming in because he obviously didn't have fantastic offensive numbers, certainly didn't have any real hardware beyond his Selke trophies. I started thinking about it, and as a guy who loved Guy Charbonneau growing up and was happy that he was in, I tried to be objective about it. And, one thing I've kind of landed on a lot through the baseball conversation about do you let the steroids guys in is what is the Hall of Fame? And on the side of, it should be a super high bar, you always hear that, well, it's not the Hall of Decent or the Hall of Good.
Yeah.
It's the Hall of Fame. It's the Hall of Great.
Yeah.
But it's really a museum. And I went there as a paying customer for the first time a couple weeks back, and it was super fun. And it's not like you go there to learn who the best players in the history of hockey are. You go there to look at the artifacts, to learn things about the game. And I have to say, I think it's legit to say, well, then let's let in a guy who was a prominent guy in his era and filled the role that they had in the 80s that we don't have anymore, where you would just be assigned to shadow someone. And that was, not every team had one, but the Oilers had Esa Tikkanen, and the Blues had Rick Mahar, and the Habs had Guy Charbonneau, and he really, I was, I suppose, kind of a nutty 8-year-old in that I legit loved the defensive forward. Like, if I was born 10 years earlier, Bob Gainey would have been my guy. I was supposed to be a Mario Lemieux fan, but I gravitated to the storyline, to the narrative of this guy can shut down anyone and he'll block shots. And it kind of feels right to me that we do let those guys in that tell the story of the game, make it more of a museum than say, like, if I just want to know who the best guys are, I go to NHL.com and sort by points, right?
Yeah. So there needs to be some consideration for guys who win these kinds of awards. But to your point about it being a museum, it's true. And you go, like, there is the museum part where there's all the videos and memorabilia and everything like that. And there are that's where the stories of the game are, like, on display. You can see everything. I mean, the Hall of Fame is part of that, but that is the Hall of Fame. Like, as a Guy Charbonneau fan, Montreal fan growing up, is your museum experience worsened because Guy Charbonneau's picture and biography isn't in the Hall of Fame part? Does it add that much to it? Like who does this? Guy Charbonneau gets in. We're going to talk about Rod Brind'Amour. We're going to talk about Shane Doan, and these are fantastic players, but is that the bar?
I mean, I suppose part of it is because, in my case, he was a Canadian, the captain of my favorite team growing up, but he, prominence plays into this, and he had a prominent role being the captain of the Montreal Canadiens. Mm-hmm. Listen, my go-to example on this in terms of just looking at hard numbers is you would be shocked by how similar Matt Sundin and Pierre Turgeon's career numbers are. They are within a whisker. Mm-hmm. You ever heard any Turgeon for the Hall talk? No. Matt Sundin was a first ballot Hall of Famer because he was the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Yep. So I think that plays into it too, that he was a Stanley Cup winning captain of the Montreal Canadiens. And again, I do feel like, by the time Brind'Amour came along, he wasn't, a trailblazer in the same way that Charbonneau was, or indicative of this era. I think there absolutely could be a case for Rod Brind'Amour, but I'm saying there is a little bit of a, trailblazer element to it, I think, with the role that Charbonneau played. And again, I come back to it. I just feel like it helps tell the story of the game in the 80s that we had guys like this, and he was the best one.
I hate giving points to guys for Hall of Fame because they played on a certain team that happens to be in Canada.
Fair enough.
I
understand someone else pulling their hair out over that too. Don't get me wrong.
But I would agree that in the history of the game, it has held some significance for sure. There's no denying that. Do you think that this modern era that we're in, the longer we go with 31 and then eventually 32 teams, that will lessen, or is it just a factor of these are huge hockey markets and these guys are going to be in the spotlight for all of time, and so it's just always going to be that way?
A lot of things have changed. The prominence of players, obviously, there's this thing called the interweb these days. Yep. And in the past 20 years, Canadian hockey fans have seen a ton of a guy like Drew Doughty because he's playing in the Olympics for Canada, whereas that wasn't necessarily, yes, you had Canada Cups in the 80s, but I don't think those teams had the same, we didn't talk about them to the same degree, and there wasn't the same hullabaloo around them as there is now about Team Canada, Olympics, international events, even the World Juniors. The kids get a huge platform early on. So I do think it will lessen a little bit. It won't be as distinct as it was 30, 40 years ago,
right.
Where it was more conceivable that someone could play in basically complete anonymity. Like, put it this way, everyone knows how good Mark Edward Vlasic, get the man's name right, is because he's played on the Olympic team, I think partially because of that. And whereas you could see if he had come along 20 years before he did, there wouldn't be as much of an appreciation continent-wide for the player he is.
Yeah, but I mean, even still, like if you're a Finnish captain of a team like the Carolina Hurricanes, you're not going to get the benefit of playing for Team Canada. Like, again, we're still getting back to, it comes back to Canada. And whether you captain a Canadian NHL team or you played for the Canadian team at the Olympics, that's giving you an inside track for the Hall of Fame when really it shouldn't, right? It's not the NHL Hall of Fame and all that stuff. It's the Hall of Fame for all of hockey. It shouldn't, but, I mean, the reality is you get more points by being in that situation, and that's never really sat well with me, and that's why I think it's worthy. We have it every year, but it is a worthy discussion to have about, okay, what is the bar? Should it be raised? Is it fine what it is? It's not going to be changed. It is what it is right now, but I always get the feeling with each year that I just feel like this bar should be a little bit higher. It feels like it's higher in Major League Baseball.
Sure.
And I feel like it would be better if we could get there.
You know who's probably getting there? Mike Babcock. I think there's a real good chance he's going there.
There's a very good chance he's going to get there.
Well, before that happens, let's have a few more discussions about Babcock and what the future might hold for him. Stick around. We're going to talk about whether we will see Babs again behind an NHL bench on Tape to Tape. We are back. Friends, if you're listening to this podcast, there's a real good chance you're into fantasy hockey. And if you are, as Rory and I are, make sure you sign up for the Sportsnet Fantasy Hockey Pool presented by RAM. Just go to sportsnet.ca/RAM for your chance to win $50,000 in cash prizes, maybe even a 2020 RAM 1500 Sport. Rory, holding pretty strong in my league so far. No big trades in either league. And usually when we're talking trades, player movement, it is the players we're speculating about. Lord knows we love it, or one of us does, on this podcast. But let's talk about some coach movement. Mike Babcock, 56 years old. Do you feel like he's done? Because I don't.
No, I don't think he's done. He's not going to end on that note.
No.
I don't think.
Now,
he didn't win a playoff round in the 3 times he got there with the Leafs, right? And he exits in November after a terrible start. I don't see a coach like that leaving the game on that note. No way.
So then, we don't know. This is a fantasy segment, so I don't have firsthand knowledge of what is in Mike Babcock's contract and how feasible it would be for other teams to pick him up, what they'd have to pay him.
Yep.
I mean, it's Mr. Babcock who set the bar very high for his coaching brethren, and I'm sure they thank him for that. The guys like Barry Trotz and Joel Quenneville and the like who've signed deals afterwards. But it's a little fun to look around the league and wonder. And as noted, there's a lot of struggling teams right now. Now, by no means are all of them on the verge of looking for a new coach. Someone out there in the Twitterverse put Nashville out there, and I was like, that's interesting. Laviolette's in year 6. They're basically 500, firmly in a cup window. Is that a team that goes, will a jolt get us there? Could a jolt put us over the top?
Yeah, so I think the first thing you look for is, who's been coaching the longest?
For a while.
And he and John Cooper have been at their teams for a long time, but Cooper got an extension. Doesn't feel like
just
that's
last
something
spring.
That's gonna, But Nashville, hugely disappointing year last year. Well out of the playoffs again at this point. That's a team that has something that Babcock didn't have to work with in Toronto, which is a very, very strong blue line.
Yep.
Like, it seems to me that's a team built more to Mike Babcock's liking than the Toronto Maple Leafs are. That's certainly a team that would seem to be a fit. I mean, if you're going to move on from a coach with the track record of Peter Laviolette midseason, and you're trying to get back into the playoffs and you're trying to kind of regain your footing as a contender, I don't think you're moving to a first-year guy.
To Johnny AHL,
You're moving to a guy like Mike Babcock. That's certainly something. Another one, guy who's been there for a while, under a lot of heat, Bruce Boudreau, but they seem to be they're not in a rebuild yet, but they seem to be going towards one. So I don't know if Babcock wants to go into a situation again on the down. But what he did in Toronto, remember when he took over, is took them while they were at the bottom and built that foundation and got them to where they are today. He's not the one that's going to take them to the finish, but he got them to a good spot. If you're a team that is in a rebuild, that's going to be something that's going to be very attractive to you. At least get us to a spot that we can be happy with, and maybe even further than that. Maybe you can get us there. And the team that looks like they might be in that spot right now, if things don't get better, if they miss the playoffs this season, is the Detroit Red Wings.
Any history there?
I mean,
any connections?
He had a lot of success there. Ken Holland is no longer there, but of course, player he used to coach, Steve Yzerman, is the GM there now. He's got a relationship there. And that's a team that their rebuild isn't going as quickly as maybe they would like. Maybe Babcock can come in and give them a bit of a kick in the butt, establish a bit of a system that they can get off the ground with, and it's the same situation as Toronto. Maybe they're even a little bit, they probably are, further along than the Leafs were when he stepped in there. So
well, yeah, the Leafs were still trying to lose when he got there.
Like Detroit's got players.
By next fall, Detroit might be trying to win.
Yeah,
so to speak.
And we'll see. Like Jeff Blashill, you'd think he gets the season, but again, like when a guy like Mike Babcock becomes available in the middle of a year, that probably gives you some pause to say maybe we just need to jump on it. Now, remember when like Alain Vigneault got fired, when Joel Quenneville got fired, high-profile coaches, they took their time to pick their spot. Where do you want to go? So Babcock doesn't have to get back into the NHL this year. But is Detroit his spot?
Claude Julien jumped to the Habs 2 weeks after the Bruins let him go.
And he was familiar with them.
He was familiar with them, and they have a lot of money, and they really wanted him.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to mid-season jump to a team that is established and doing well. There's not a lot of those opportunities over the summer where everything is going swimmingly.
Yeah.
They're going to keep their coaches. So it's going to be a spot that is either struggling or at the bottom trying to get up. And that's why Detroit just seems like one, like, man, that makes sense on a lot of different levels.
I'm glad you brought up Detroit, because I've been having these moments during the course of this whole cycle where I'm like, God, I'm the old guy, because you're hearing people basically say Mike Babcock is out of touch, still jarring for me, because don't forget, this was a guy who took over the Wings after the lockout season, the lost season, and that progressive organization, which had drafted Nick Lidstrom, drafted European guys, obviously brought the Russians over all before Mike Babcock was there. But he was the guy who really pressed the puck possession and breaking out up the middle. Even in 2005, a lot of teams, even at the NHL level, it was, let's rim this thing and go out the boards. And my understanding, I've had more than one person tell me, is basically Babcock who went against the orthodoxy and was like, well, we got to come up the middle. We're going to make a couple 10-foot passes here because that's where the space is. He was the guy when people still hung on to dopey beliefs that you couldn't win with a couple Europeans like Datsuk and Zetterberg. He was like, these are my puck hounds. These are my guys. We're going to win with these guys. And they did. And that's still, I feel like, my reference point for Mike Babcock, and that it's not, he won't let guys be free. Well, I think it's just that he wants them to be puck hounds who are always around it, And I'm just not convinced that this guy who was ahead of the curve has, even if, inevitably tends to happen as you get older and you go from the 40 guy to the 55 guy. Maybe you fall behind the times a bit, but I don't think he's a guy who's closed off to new thoughts.
It's not like he can't coach star players. He coached Team Canada and made them a defensive just juggernaut, right? And they could score and they wanted, but they won on defense. It's just how he wants to play. I think it really shows, though, how much, Like when Babcock took over Detroit there, the game had changed a lot coming out of the 04-05 lockout. It became much faster, much more about offense. You needed good power plays and all that stuff. It shows how much the game has changed from even then, from 2009, 2010 to now, over the last 10 years. It changed so much from 03-04 to 05-06, and then how it's drastically changed even from then. I don't think Babcock's closed off to other ideas, but I do think that the takeaway from the Toronto experience this season is that he needed to change a little bit more for this team, and it just didn't work. And that's fine. Maybe he needs to go somewhere else. I think he hits the ground running somewhere else, and his style isn't so antiquated that he doesn't have a place in the game anymore. He's where he's at because of his ability to change over the years and adapt with the changing times. I think the takeaway, though, is that he's probably going to need to change something about his approach. Like he can't maybe be rolling four lines as much as he would like to. Maybe he needs to open up the possibility of splitting up your lefties and righties. Like the fact is, you have to work with the cap building team, so you just have to get the players that you can get, and maybe you need to be a little bit more open to that. But the core of what he does, of puck possession, being responsible on defense, that's as true now as it ever was, right?
Absolutely.
Like you always needed to be strong on defense. So as long as you can inject that foundation play and those kind of expectations, and all the Leafs talk about how well organized his practices were. That's talking about getting your team prepared for games. Maybe his message just was no longer for this team, but that doesn't mean it's not going to work somewhere else. What his pillars are still work in the NHL today.
Well, we will see what Mike Babcock moves on to eventually, but a lot of people's minds, of course, focus on what's going to happen right now for the Leafs. Sheldon Keefe, new coach coming in. We're going to bring in Luke Fox to tell us what he expects from the new bench boss of the Blue and White, coming up on Tape to Tape. Time now for our overtime segment, brought to you by Subway. No joke, Subway now delivers. Joining us this week on the pod to talk about the big news in Toronto, man who covers the Leafs very closely, it is Sportsnet's Luke Fox. Luke, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, gentlemen.
Happy to have you. Did you think there was any world last year when the Leafs lost and after a little hesitation brought Mike Babcock back that he wouldn't make it through the regular season? We all knew he was going to get, if they didn't get through the first round of the playoffs, that was going to be it. But did you foresee any scenario like this where he didn't get through the regular season?
I thought things would have to really go off the rails. I am surprised that he's the first coach fired this year. I thought they'd give him a little more rope, because it makes you think, if he only gets till November and he never gets a full healthy roster, why didn't they do it in the summer?
Yeah.
And I just think, a lot had to do with the effort level and the body language of the players. I thought it was really telling that President Brendan Shanahan mentioned the looks of the faces of the players. And I think that told him that he had lost the room and that there was still plenty of runway to get this thing back on the rails and rally and hopefully get in the playoffs. So I think that's why they made the decision. But yeah, I'm surprised. I thought, he'd be given a little bit more chance to rebound.
What'd you make of the timing of it? You lose 6-1 to Pittsburgh on Saturday. And that seems to be the game that maybe that was the end, because they weren't all bad against Vegas, really. Like, they had a really strong third period. Maybe it's a different story if Marc-Andre Fleury doesn't make that huge save. I think most of us kind of looked at the calendar and said, well, if they keep losing, Sunday's the day that makes sense, because there's 3 days off between games. But he runs practice the day after the Vegas game. He speaks to the media after that, and then a couple hours later probably is when the news broke that he got fired. So what do you make of just the timing of when this decision was made? Yeah,
the timing caught me off guard a little bit, and I think maybe it had to do with Kyle Dubas being in Toronto and not with the team for the GM meetings. So maybe they just wanted to make sure he got back there. I thought it was going to happen if it didn't happen after the Pittsburgh game, because that was like the nadir for this team. Like, it was a disaster. I remember I wasn't in Pittsburgh for that one, but I was watching on TV, and my family wanted to change the channel, but I wanted to keep it on because I was like, how bad is this going to get?
Yeah.
Like, how bad can they play? How many more goals can they leave poor Kaskisuo out to dry? Like, if there's any game that you're going to get riled up for, it's that one. You've just, lost 4 in a row, I guess, at that point. You got a brand new goalie who, usually a good team rallies around a guy like that. And instead they laid an egg. Pittsburgh was also playing a back-to-back. And you can't use injuries as an excuse. They're missing Sidney Crosby of all people. Yeah. So it was so apathetic that I think that's, probably when they maybe in their minds made the decision, even though they didn't pull the trigger. But when it didn't happen, like you said, in those couple days, I thought maybe he'd get to the end of the road trip just to see if he can try and get a few wins here.
So the Leafs have turned the page. Let's do the same. Sheldon Keefe, a man you have spoken to a bunch, covering the Marlies as well. He's obviously been in town for a number of years here running the AHL team. You've written a piece at sportsnet.ca about his relationship, which everyone knows goes way back with Kyle Dubas. And you really tried to convey to people that they have this secure relationship where they know they could go at each other sometimes, but their vision is very aligned. What can you tell us about, what you've noticed about Keefe being around him, coaching the Marlies, and what you know about his relationship with Kyle Dubas?
Well, they're tight, really tight. And that just comes from years of being together. The fact that, Dubas was the GM of the Marlies when they won their championship. I mean, you go through a run like that and end up sipping from the same trophy together, that binds people for life. I mean, you talk to any player and they will talk to you about the relationship they have with the coach that they won a cup with, or the players they won a cup with. Like, that just cements things for life. And the fact that they put in the years in the OHL and the Sioux, Dubas had brought in Keefe under similar circumstances as a mid-season replacement. So they've been through that. And the fact that Keefe has coached, I think it's 13 of the guys that are currently on the Leafs roster at some point, and he has a relationship. Those things will help mitigate against the learning curve or the uncomfortability that comes with taking over someone else's team. Is the fact that he knows a lot of the guys on the roster, and a big chunk of them, they've won a championship together. The first championship in Toronto men's pro hockey in over half a century. And so they're tight. And it was interesting. Dubas and Keefe both said that they feel free to just blow up at each other, get in really heated arguments. But the bottom line is they might disagree on a certain player or a certain player's usage or a line combination, like some of the details. But the bottom line is they have the same philosophy and they're aligned in the kind of identity they want in a team. And there was always a bit of a disconnect there between Babcock and Dubas, and you could see it in the passive aggressive comments he'd make through the media. It was evident. So this is Dubas's guy, but he's never coached in the NHL, not even as an assistant. So it's a different spotlight. It's a different task.
It's funny that he's 39 and we're not even making a big deal of that anymore. It's kind of like, well, that's, I don't know if it's the norm, but it's certainly not exceptional anymore to have someone that young coach your NHL team.
And it's really interesting that two of the, future Hall of Fame coaches in Quenneville and Babcock both lost their jobs to 30-somethings.
Yeah.
With Jeremy Colleton in Chicago. It's kind of like, we tried the old school way. We tried the established, the golden resume way. Let's go the complete opposite and bring in a guy who's never coached in the NHL, but is quote unquote a player's coach.
Yep.
And if Babcock lost the room, a young room, this could be the solution.
And Colleton really opened up the Blackhawks last year, like all offense, and he tried combinations that Quenneville wasn't going to try. We're expecting that Keefe is going to be doing the same thing here in Toronto, but I think we can agree that's not going to happen right away. Like the team and the line combinations, although he is going to change.
Careful, Roy. We're recording this on the day he's going to coach it. Who knows?
Yeah, but what
Morgan
we
Riley
see,
might be playing center tonight.
Yeah, whatever we see tonight is probably not what he ends up landing on for the long term. Like he's going to need practices, he's going to need games to figure out what he wants. Is there something that you're looking forward to what you think he will do, or something that you hope he does in terms of a line combination or a defense pair?
Yes. And what I found really interesting today was in Dubas and Shanahan talking in the media in Arizona was they tried to really couch this as, it's going to take some time. It's going to take days, weeks, months. They're kind of giving, setting the bar of expectation give Keefe some time, let him experiment. But already we noticed in practice today, he already made a line juggle. He put Kapanen down to the second line, bumped up Ilya Mikheyev to the second line, and Kapanen down to third. Spez's center, whereas is Kerfoot. That used to be his spot. He's back on the wing where he played in Colorado. But the most interesting thing for me is, can he get Tyson Barrie going? Babcock wasn't able to.
Yeah.
And that's not just on Babcock. That's on Tyson Barrie as well.
Yeah.
But Babcock had in his mind that he wanted one defenseman on PP1. And already we've seen that they're going to try and have Barrie and Riley on PP1. And Jake Muzzin, who played some power play when he was with LA, gets a shot, with that booming shot of his to run the point on PP2. So already that's getting a new look, and it needed it. I mean, their power play was confoundingly inept, like a disaster. So already he's making changes in. But I think Barry's the big one.
I mean, you mentioned the Pittsburgh game as the, how can this get any worse? I mean, it was the same night that Elliot Friedman was reporting on headlines on Hockey Night in Canada that, the Leafs aren't shopping Tyson Barrie, but teams are calling. And that was the moment for me where I was like, God, this thing has gone off the rails. If you had told me in September, 6 weeks into the season, we'd be talking about scenarios where maybe they will trade Tyson Barrie, this guy who was the prized offseason acquisition. That just showed you how bad things have gotten. Obviously, for any number of reasons, before you're going to make that move, you're going to make the move they made. So we will see exactly what impact this has on guys who haven't been able to get going. And I guess, the other part of this equation, of course, is now, Kyle Dubas has signed these guys to these contracts. It's his coach. It's his show now. Everything lands squarely on him. If it doesn't pick up here, in the next 6 months to whatever, 18.
Yeah, I mean, Dubas is trying something really out of the box. It's a grand experiment. Let's spend a greater percentage of our cap than anyone has before and maybe after on forwards. Let's, pinch pennies on the blue line. Let's pinch pennies on our backup goalie and just try and outscore teams. And now he has a coach who, according to the coach and according to the GM and according to the president, shares that vision. And they're going to let the horses run.
Sure.
And we'll see. But even the best possession teams don't have the puck 100% of the
That's
time.
right.
They still need to defend.
That's right.
So how much of that is their inability to defend and keep the puck out of their net? How much of that is poor roster construction? Or how much of it is, players like Austin and Nylander and whoever just getting tired of listening to the same voice telling them to defend, and how much will that be remedied by just having a fresh set of eyes and a fresh voice in that room?
Yeah.
So what do you think what do you think the timeline here is? Because now all the focus is squarely on Dubas because the coach is gone. That excuse of them not driving is out of the picture now. It's all going to be about roster construction. I think we could all agree that had Babcock lasted the entire regular season, he needed to win at least one playoff round to keep his job.
Yeah, or maybe two.
Maybe two. I don't think the same is going to be true about Dubas in this job. He probably deserves a training camp and a fresh start at the beginning of the season with his coach first. But what if they don't get this thing back on track this season? What if we get to next November and they're still in a similar spot where they're not challenging for the division lead? They're on that playoff bubble. What is the timeline here for Dubas and the management team to get this thing back on track before we start wondering what's his future with this team?
Yeah, and I think that trickles all the way up to Shanahan.
For sure.
He's the one who chose Dubas over Lamoriello, and, maybe it's going to look great by the springtime or a year and a half, but right now it looks horrible. The Islanders have the best winning percentage in the whole NHL.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
And, and they lost their best player.
yeah.
So,
But they are also a great example of what a coach can do for a team. And no one's going to compare Sheldon Keefe to Barry Trotz the day of Sheldon Keefe's first NHL game. But, point is, a coach can have a serious effect on a team if everyone gets in sync.
yes, I absolutely, 100%. And just talking to the way the Blues talked about Craig
Berube,
Berube
yeah.
last year. It's just like they wanted to win for him. And whenever I talk to a member of the Maple Leafs, the positive things they would say about Mike Babcock is say that he was prepared. They knew what to expect from the opposition. Like he was the first guy at the rink. Like he put in work,
Yeah.
which is probably why he had tremendous respect for guys like him, like Hyman, like Tavares. Like those were the kind of guys he loved because they're blue collar guys. They put in work. They wake up early, leave late. He loves those type of guys because he was one of them. So they'd say that about him. And they'd say that he ran a really efficient practice. But they never said, like, I love this guy. I love playing for him. Whereas, Alexander Kerfoot said he loved playing for Jared Bednar.
Yeah.
And the sense I get is the Marlies loved playing for Sheldon Keefe.
What's the biggest challenge for Keefe? Because we know Toronto's got off to a bad start this season, but if you go back to even January 1, they've got a losing record. Their power play, penalty kill, bottom half of the league, 27th in shots against. Like, this isn't just a new problem. He's in the middle of a losing streak. You're towards the bottom of the NHL standings. You got to get this thing. You got to start winning games very quickly here. But he's also going to need time, like we talked about, to do what he wants to do. What's his number one biggest challenge stepping in here at the end of November?
Okay, well, there's multiple.
Sure.
Yep. I think there's some hockey challenges, like the special teams. Both of them are a mess. Like if they were to win the special teams battles that they've lost, they'd have a much better record. Like it's really hurting them. Defense is killing them as well. Giveaways. Like there's a lot of tactical things that are a challenge, but I honestly think the biggest thing is coming into the spotlight. And I think Babcock, for all his faults and for all his stubbornness, and for sure he was beyond perfect, but he was really good at handling what is kind of a really critical fan base, a really critical large group of media, controlling the message.
You weren't going to phase Mike Babcock.
You weren't going to phase him, and you weren't going to trick him into revealing too much. He played things tight to the vest, and he always gave the message he wanted to give. And just the scrutiny. I've gone to Marley's practices. There's like 2 people there, and that's in the playoffs. Like it's going to be a different animal.
Yeah.
Not saying he can't hack it, but it's going to be a
change.
challenge. It's going to be a bit of an eye-opening thing for him.
Well, here we are. Like I said, I never thought we would get to this moment before the playoffs, but news of the season so far for sure. Mike Babcock and the Leafs parting ways. Luke, thanks very much for joining us today.
Anytime. It was fun.
All right. You can follow Luke as he follows the Leafs on Twitter at Luke Fox Jukebox. You can follow Rory at Rory Boylan. That's always an easy one to remember. Myself at Dixon on Sports. Check out everything going on with the Leafs and every other Canadian team in the whole league at sportsnet.ca. Check back next week for more glass rattling hockey action on Tape to Tape.